Hello and welcome to the Thursday, February 12th, 2026 edition of the SANS Internet Storm Center's Stormcast. My name is Johannes Ulrich, recording today from Jacksonville, Florida. And today's episode is brought to you by the SANS.edu Graduate Certificate Program in Purple Team Operations. In diaries today, the first one we have is by Xavier about the use of the Windows subsystem for Linux in Malware. Malware certainly has discovered this neat tool in newer Windows variants, and well, it's often sort of enabled, not necessarily used, or a user may not even be aware that this interesting tool is sitting there. So with the Windows subsystem for Linux, you essentially have a Linux container virtual machine, whatever you want to call it, that can easily be accessed from the Windows command line. You can also easily copy files into the file system accessible by this subsystem. And of course, Malware loves to use the ease of use of Linux and also the ability to, well, maybe easier hide some of the artifacts within this subsystem. The example that Xavier has is actually JavaScript that checks if a particular system it is running on does have WSL available, and then it takes advantage of it. And Apple today released its usual, well, update everything patch. Apple does not have a regular sort of patch cadence like Microsoft, so somewhat random that this came out the Wednesday after Patch Tuesday, but this particular update was expected because, well, Apple sort of got ready to release the next increment in its operating systems. And with a couple new features, we of course also get a number of security fixes. In this case, 71 different vulnerabilities are being addressed. There is one vulnerability that is already being exploited, as Apple puts it, that this particular vulnerability was discovered by looking at a particular incident that was a fairly targeted and limited sort of impact incident. And there were two additional vulnerabilities that this particular incident took advantage of that were already patched back in December. Not clear whether it just took longer to patch this last vulnerability or whether that wasn't initially discovered in the analysis of this incident. Definitely something that you do want to address. They're also covering some of the older versions of the operating system, so you don't necessarily have to go all the way and update to the latest version of, for example, macOS 26. But macOS, also the last two versions before that, 15 and 14, did receive updates. Now, one company that does always provide updates in sync with Microsoft's Patch Tuesday is Adobe. I usually cover them on Patch Tuesday itself. Didn't do it yesterday because I didn't think and still don't think that this month's update are really that exciting. There are 9 different products that are being patched, but sort of none of the big hitters that I'm considering usually, like Acrobat or Magento, so the Adobe Commerce part, or Cold Fusion. Those are the ones that I'm usually more worried about. Nevertheless, if you're running any of the Adobe applications that were patched yesterday, some of the vulnerabilities are certainly critical and do allow arbitrary remote code execution if a file is being opened by the user with malicious content. Well, and then talk about Microsoft's Patch Tuesday. We do have details regarding what I think is a pretty interesting and surprising vulnerability that was patched with yesterday's Patch Tuesday, and that's a vulnerability in Microsoft Notepad. Now, Microsoft Notepad did start out as, well, a simple text editor, maybe for some a little bit too simple, so Microsoft added more features to it. In the later versions of Notepad, you're actually able to include links, and well, then the idea is if you click on a link, the browser opens and displays the web page that you're linking to. The problem with this is, as a blog post here points out, that Notepad actually doesn't care what the actual protocol or schema is that's being used. So instead of HTTP or HTTPS, you could, for example, direct the Microsoft installer to pop up or any other software and then pass URLs to that software, which then may lead to arbitrary code execution. So this is a fairly easy to exploit scenario, and the proof of concept exploits are available for this particular vulnerability that was patched this week. So definitely pay attention to this. In order to be vulnerable, you must open a markdown file, because the markdown may have things like URLs and additional sort of markup in it. And that's sort of what's being exploited here. Notepad actually parsing markdown files. They don't have to have the .md extension. Other files that are markdown files with other extensions may also be recognized as such, and the exploit will work. Well, and that's it for today. So thanks for listening. Thanks for liking. Thanks for subscribing to this podcast. And as always, talk to you again tomorrow. Bye.